Hello, I'm Angela Princeville, and with me today are family law lawyers Shireen Abdi and Tabinda Balas. And today we'll be discussing parenting plans, creating a parenting plan, and some of the pitfalls and considerations for you. I guess the first I want to start off with, is there any such thing as a universally perfect parenting plan?
No.
I wish there was, Angela.
I don't even, I would even take that further and say there's really no such thing as a regular parenting plan.
Yes.
Because
I mean,
I've had clients in the beginning stages and they're thinking, well, they would ask me and I ask them, what do you want? And that's always my starting point, right? I would always ask my clients what they want, not necessarily because I think it's what's best or whatever, but at least, it's a starting point to see what they have a vision, or what vision they see of their families in this space post separation. And a lot of times they'll throw that back to me and say, well, what's normal?
yeah.
So yeah, there's
Short
no
answer
such
is
thing.
there's no such thing. It's a case by case. Every family is different and unique, and different plans for different families.
Yeah, true. Yeah. So when you're thinking parenting plan, I think the first thing you want to put in mind is the best interest of the child. So everything we are talking about here has to be, it's going to be based on your family. It's going to be based on what's best, not for you necessarily, but for the child. And I think I want to kind of clear that up. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive concepts. Like what's best for you might be best for the child. And something basic as well. If we ask you to pick up a child at 2 p.m., but you're at work, then obviously we have to take that into consideration, right? But the focus is generally on what's best for the child. So as you get started in this process, that's something you need to think of. There's no universally best way. There's no normal, even though a lot of people have different concepts of normal. And that's an interesting one, because for some people, normal is equal shared parenting time. Other people think it's every other weekend for dad. So everyone kind of has this concept of what normal is. Well, it doesn't really exist. And so let's kind of talk about, and then you have to think about the best interest of your child. So having said that, let's look at schedules. So what kind of, Sabina, I guess you could start us off with let's discuss various parenting schedules. So I'm just going to throw this out there, a 2-5 schedule, for example.
Right. So there are various schedules, 2-5, 2-3. What that means is a child is with mom 2 days, 2 days with dad, and then they rotate the weekend generally, or the next 5 days. There's also a parenting plan of week about. I can't believe I'm still calling it access, but
I
it's
know, I mean,
parenting
it's been
time.
almost a year, right? It's almost been 1 year since we stopped using that language.
Exactly. So a week about parenting time. What I personally like, but of course, every parenting plan, like Angela, you mentioned, is unique to each file. I like 2 days on, like Monday and Tuesday with mom, Wednesday and Thursday with dad, and on Fridays they rotate. It just brings a little bit more stability and consistency for the kids, right? You got to, again, like you said, the test is always what's in the best interest of the child, right? So they know for the next however many years, Monday and Tuesdays they're going to be with mom, and Wednesdays and Thursdays dad. So it just kind of helps them put them at ease. They know exactly where they are. But really, does that work all the time? No, not really. Right? So it's up to however the parents are able to accommodate. I know some people say, well, a week about is too long to go without seeing the other parent. So if that's the case, that's working out well for them, then we add in maybe one overnight, either on a Wednesday night or a Tuesday night with the parent that they're not seeing that week. So variety of ways that you can do a parenting plan, just depending on what's convenient for you, but always the best interest of the child.
Yeah, that's a good one. So Shereen, I'm going to throw this to you. So what do you say to clients that come with you with this sort of presumption that because they were equal caregivers during the marriage, that they must now have a 50-50 shared parenting plan?
I mean, it depends on who's my client. No, I'm just joking. But honestly, it really, like, I think a lot of the time people historically, like, they would say, okay, well, one party was primarily residing with the children, so therefore that should continue. Think of like your separation as kind of the catalyst to, okay, now things are different. What's going to work out? Just because historically you've had shared parenting or you've had primary parenting time, it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be the case. As we keep saying, the best interest of the child or the children in this case matters. And we look at a presumption of different things, like, is it going to be, what's in the best interest of, it when one party was, primarily watching the children while the other worked. Now, if both parties are working, what kind of schedule accommodates? Does one party have shift work? There's so many different factors that play a role into, what kind of schedule now makes sense. But to just say, what, historically, this has been the situation, so this should continue, is not going to be this. That's not going to be the reason that you get shared parenting time.
Yes, that's absolutely. I agree with you on that. And so how do you sort of deal with a situation where someone is saying, well, and we hear this very often. So, where our clients are complaining that the other side uses their parenting time. I'm going to make this easier. So let's say a grandparent. So Tabina is glitching there for some reason, but that's fine. She'll jump in this conversation whenever her video comes back on. So it's life. This is we're in a glitch, so we're back. All right.
Thank you. I just want to say
yeah.
my video is having some problem, but my audio is working fine, so I may be able to jump in. Yeah, even though my
Okay,
video might not be
fantastic.
working.
Okay, so we're gonna power through. Technology be damned. So, in terms of, I mean, how many times? I'm sure you guys hear this often, where someone's saying, "Well, their parenting time is spent with either the grandparents." That's a common one. So they're saying, "Well, he gets 50% of the time, or he gets every other weekend, but he's not even spending that time with the child." And so I don't want him to have that time anymore, and vice versa as well. I don't want her to have it anymore. So, Tabina, how do you deal with those kinds of situations?
Well, it's interesting you brought that up because I currently have a file like that where both parties worked full time and the paternal grandparents live with the parties. So my client's position was that, hey, my parents took care of the kids while we both were working, right? Now that they're separated, believe it or not, the judge said, yeah, but you're the parents now, and the circumstances when you were together and who was taking care of the kids is different than what it is now. Now it's your responsibility, right? So if you are working 9 to 5, then and mom is not, and there are other factors here, but I'm just gonna look at a big picture here. But mom is not, then really the kids should be with mom because mom can look after them, right? But then sometimes clients are like, well, I'm able to work from home. Now in pre-COVID world, we have that flexibility. And again, the court said, you may be working from home, but when you're working from home, you're still working 9 to 5. Yeah, you can't say, oh, I can take care of my kids while I'm working from home, because that's an 8-hour work. So you shouldn't be saying, oh, just because I'm home, I can conveniently look after, and my parents are there. It's your responsibility to look after the kids.
Jump on your point about like grandparents, like it really depends on the level of involvement they're having. If they're, assisting, with pickups and drop-offs for like an hour and a half, while that other party, like maybe the pickup time at school is 3:30 and they don't finish work till 5. Like, to me, that's not enough to warrant not having parenting time, even because of that hour and a half, 2 hours, sometimes even 4 hours. It really just depends on the case. But really, it's just, if you're using them kind of as assistance and support just to kind of facilitate the parenting time, I don't think there's any problem with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, good points both ways. And that leads me to something I wanted to talk about next, actually, is you want to think of your schedule and your ability to manage the parenting schedule, right? So, I mean, when you think of the best interest of the child, the happy parents, raise happy children for the most part. So, I again remember, as I said earlier, the best interest doesn't just mean that we don't think of the parents at all. So when we're creating this parenting schedule, part of the consideration has to be if you can manage it, right? And then Shireen, you were just talking about pick up and drop off, but I want to drop a bomb here, and Davina, I want to throw this at you. So grandparent, that seems a little bit less contentious for the most part, except, there's a deep hatred there, but it is what it is. But what about girlfriend? What about where someone has a new partner in their life that now comes into the whole pick up and drop off mix?
So that's that can be very contentious, right? Now,
Yeah.
not only now you're separated and you're dealing with the breakdown of your relationship and other issues and going through the family law proceeding. Oh, by the way, I have a new partner in the picture. So, generally, when you're on the other side, you're like, absolutely not. I don't want that communication. The child is, my ex's responsibility. But really, if you think about it, it's time to move on. And you have, if that person, their partner, girlfriend or partner, if they're involved in your ex's life and they're living together, I mean, there are ways you can limit the interaction, or you can limit the parenting time to say, like, add the priority parenting clause, right? If the
Okay.
parent is unable to take care of the child for more than 2 hours or 8 hours, then they must contact the other parent. But if it's within a 2 or an 8 hour, whatever number of hours you agree within that time range, then there shouldn't be a problem, because now, in in situations where you're changing your current partner every couple of months, that may be a red flag, right?
Yeah.
But if you are able to show, hey, I've been in a long committed relationship for a year, we're married or not married, and this is my partner, no criminal involvement, no CS, no police, anything like that, there shouldn't be any contentious issues there. But of course, I mean, emotions do take the best of us, and so sometimes the law doesn't make sense to the clients, and they say absolutely not. And I think that's something that the parties or clients should really reconsider their position, because courts are inclined to order parenting time.
Absolutely. So Shireen, I want you to, thanks for that. I mean, I couldn't like add anything more to that. So it's
Thank
well,
you.
well explained. But Shireen, I want you to weigh in on sort of work schedules, right? So how that plays into crafting your parenting plan.
It plays a big role in crafting your parenting plan because, of course, like if you're asking for shared amounts of parenting time and you work full time and maybe your shift work, like and maybe you work overnights, like how do those work? And if the bulk of your parenting is going to take place during, the time the child's at school, it's not going to make sense. So a lot of the time, like work schedules play a big role. A lot of the time people will use that as an excuse also not to facilitate, parenting time to the other party. But again, you have to look at these with the microscope of what is in the child's best interest. If maybe, dad's schedule only can accommodate, primarily weekends or, evening visits, then we're going to look at a schedule that encompasses more midweek visits and maybe, maybe no overnights or maybe overnights only on the weekend and things where you can structure a more flexible arrangement. Of course, there are work schedules that are beyond me, like, where they're just not fixed. I have clients who have schedules that are fixed for 3 weeks, then they change 4 weeks. And it's great
Yeah.
if you can have someone that would work with you. Hopefully you do. If not, like again, like there needs to be some give when it comes to certain flexibility. And of course, like
Mhm.
if they're the other party is unable to watch them, but their proposal is, well, I could at least put them in daycare. Like that's not sufficient. So at the end of the day, work schedules are very important and working around those parameters about what your work schedule is, if it's fixed,
Mhm.
not fixed, all of that fun jazz. But realistically, like it plays a big part.
No,
Uh,
I like what you read when you talked about the schedules, like the weird schedules. I had a client that was a police or that is a police officer, and it's interesting because some days the hours of work, like it's starting at 5 and it's ended at, or I think it was starts at 7, but they needed a couple of hours to get ready for work at the station. And it was just very complex, but they were creative and they were able to both agree to hiring a nanny And so even though dad had a more traditional schedule that was 7 to something, like maybe 3 or whatever, but the nanny worked out great because when it was my client's parenting time, then the nanny was there for 5. And at least it was the same constant figure in the child's life. So it just meant some weeks nanny starting a little bit earlier, and then other days, and nanny was fine. The nanny was fine going to both homes. So some weeks she was coming to mom's at 5, and
Yeah.
other weeks she was going to dad, and that was fantastic because at least the child was able to have a constant figure in her life. So it's you don't always get that level of cooperation. So for those that are able to do that, that's great. But Tabina, I want you to kind of weigh in as well. An important consideration that I find is children's activities, right? How does that play into parenting time? I think that it could get contentious sometimes, can it?
Oh, absolutely. And more often than not, if the kids, I mean, again, it depends on each case, but say you're separated, but your kids have been attending 2 or 3 extracurricular activities. You want that to continue. You have to factor that in, right? Into the parenting plan. Either you need to agree to take the kids for their regular activities, and if you can, then allow the other parent to come and do that. Then there's some clients where the kids have not been involved during the course of the relationship, but after the breakdown, bam, they're enrolled in music lessons and swimmings and karate and whatnot, right? Then courts know you're doing that on purpose to frustrate the other parent's parenting time. So you have to be considerate. Again, the best interest of the child. If your child likes all the activities, great. But you got to prove it that the child enjoys it. There has to be some consistency.
Maybe schedule it during your own time a little bit more,
Exactly,
and not during the other person's time,
and be
right?
considerate. Ask the other parent, right? If say, hey, I'm going to involve or enroll the child into swimming classes. Do you have any objections, or what days work for you? I mean, again, sometimes I think clients forget that you're going to be parents for the rest of the life. You're going to be involved in these children's life. So communication is a must. And without communicating, either decision making or parenting time is very hard to manage. Really, for forever, for as long as those kids, I think you'll always your parents' child, no matter how old you are. So
Yeah. That is true. And yeah, I mean, yeah, good one. You have to, so there's a lot of, as you could tell so far, there's a lot of things you have to consider into when making your parenting plan. And that's why there's really no normal, right? Because for some kids, weekends are all about one sporting activity or another. So if you just offer somebody a weekend, then all they really get is maybe a few hours with the child at night, and then it's really not quality parenting time. And I find with activities, that's one that's really hard. And I shouldn't even limit this to just organized activities, sometimes just friends, because I find that there's teenage kids that just want to hang out with their friends on the weekends, especially when both parents don't live in the same jurisdiction.
exactly.
And I know children with that are living in Pickering, for example, that have the other parties living in Mississauga, and weekends when the friends want to get together, when there's parties happening, they miss out on those because they are dads, and I just or moms, and everyone kind of needs to be sensitive about these things.
Yeah.
If you can accommodate the children's activities, because yes, your priority granted, but again, for a 15-year-old, neither parent is priority. They don't care about either one of you. They just want to be able to spend time with their friend. And it's just unfortunate that it's happening on the weekend where you have parenting time. So just be mindful of that, because sometimes being right at the expense of losing that relationship with your child, to me, it's ultimately not worth it, right? But speaking of, I'm going to that segues into proximity of home. So, Shireen, how does that factor into creating a parenting plan? Where the parents live, how do you factor that in?
Absolutely. It plays a big role. So like if you're seeking like a shared parenting arrangement, I'm imagining you would live close to each other, or else like facilitating something like that doesn't make sense. Driving an hour out, or especially if these kids have school, they're school aged, even before that, like it's best to have some situation with consistency. So even if you don't reside together and you have a shared parenting schedule, to put forward thinking to, okay, what happens when the child does actually go to school, what a parenting schedule would look like. And usually, if they're at an infant stage, you do need to put your mind to that. And I know that sometimes it's so far in the future, you don't think about it, but it comes really quickly. But where you live is a really important factor, because like I said, like for shared parenting, you need to be close in proximity to be able to facilitate that parenting time, to get the children to school on time, to make sure that they're not traveling back and forth for hours on end between two households. It also makes it easier. And of course, like, it plays a big role. So if you don't live close together, then, maybe you're looking at more different schedules, more creative schedules. Like I said, similar to like a work schedule being a consideration, this is also an important factor. So if, one party only is living, 2 hours away, then maybe long weekends, and maybe structuring a long weekend every month, or, some sort of schedule. Maybe you can get a little more creative. We're very creative, solution oriented people, because we understand like there's no one rigid, one size fits all in creating a schedule for families, because it's not the same. And that's kind of been consistent with what we've been telling you guys. And we hope that like you guys can understand that like there is no like one size fits all. And
I'm
the
glad
reality
you're saying this. Is there 1 kilometer that fits all? Because sometimes people
No.
would say, well, we're 20 minutes away. So that, well, the first thing that comes is like time. It's just 20 minutes. Well, there's no like objective way to look at it. I think a 20-minute commute is a lot. If if you live in Pickering and you're working in Brampton, I'm sure you're like 20 minutes. Like that's nothing. But to be 20 minutes, it's a lot of commute. But again, and I've had that same experience with judges as well. There's times where I've argued that it's an hour difference, and they're like no. Or if it's 20 minutes within Toronto versus 20 minutes on the back roads of the country, again it's viewed differently. Then sometimes I take an approach of looking at the kilometers, and then you're like, okay, well, we all know, depending on the time of day, a 5 kilometer drive could look very different, right? Like try driving 5 kilometers
exactly.
during rush hour. So in Toronto, you would get nowhere. But again, so these are sort of I kind of like how you said that, because those are the things we would look at. So even though you say, well, it's just 20 kilometers away, well, in what direction? Is it in the city? Is it away? How old is this child, right? And again, what judge, if you have the unfortunate scenario of putting this in front of a judge, if you get a judge like me that thinks 20 minutes is is a huge commute, then you got a problem. But then you can meet a judge that thinks, no, it's really not a big deal. Like driving 1 hour one way or the other, like it's no big deal. The kids would nap in the car, like really not that big a deal. So again, there's no kilometer fixed in the law that says if it's this is the way it works. It's just, what does your family dynamic look like, and what are the facts in your case, right? So on residences, speaking of residences, of course, we have to touch relocation.
Oh boy.
That's an exciting one. Honestly, we're going to have to do an entire talk on relocation. We have to, because it's a big one. It's an interesting one, and it's uncertain. There is, I mean, if we can't even agree objectively on what a huge distance is within the city, then you can imagine when people now want to switch provinces and countries, how many factors kind of come into play here, right? But I don't know if anyone wants to weigh in on the relocation issue.
I mean, relocation. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, please go.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm very passionate these days about relocation. I've done quite a few, but really with one of my current clients, relocation is an issue. One thing I do want to say, please provide a notice, follow the legislation, follow the rules. Don't move, don't take the kids and then ask for forgiveness later. It's not going to work. The law is 100% clear. You got to provide notice or obtain a court order before you move, right? If you don't, then guess what? You move, and 2 weeks later, if your ex is now filing for an emergency parenting time or return of the children, they are most likely going to get it because there are laws in place for a reason, and you have to follow them, no matter how urgent you think your reason might be.
I just want to preface that by saying, absent like your existing agreement, if you don't have an existing agreement that allows you to relocate and spells out what relocation looks like, yes, you'll need a court order or the consent of the other party. I just want to clear that up.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, true,
Thank
true,
you.
true. That's true. I think I would add to that an exception. And please, this is a very narrow exception. And this is when we're dealing with family violence. And I don't want this to be misinterpreted as the existence of family violence doesn't take you away from the rules, doesn't mean the rules don't apply to you. But let's say in an extreme situation, I'll just make up facts here. So you have, let's say, and I'm going to go female because a lot of domestic violence is predominantly against women. So I will just say you have a woman that's being abused and has no family in Ontario and maybe has parents living in Quebec. And after a domestic incident, or just maybe one day finds her voice and her strength, decides to take off with the children and head to Quebec. Now, in those circumstances, it's possible for you to get forgiveness. It's not ideal, but that's the one very narrow situation where the courts might allow you because you don't have any support within the GTA. You are a victim of family violence, and it must be reasonable. It must be reasonable under the circumstances that you've moved, the move. So I just want to put that out there, that there's times where we know you have to do what you have to do. We will be there to support you. Ideally, as soon as you move, you want to, go to the courts yourself and quickly ask for that order right away, right? So don't just take the laws into your hands and just move and never ever contact the person ever again. There's ways we can help you. We can hide your address if that's, something that you're concerned about, but please find a way to get back to the courts right away and follow the rules.
And for clarity, like relocation doesn't need to be like province to province. It's just honestly anything that would impact the other party's parenting time in a significant way. And that could honestly look like moving from Pickering to Mississauga.
I know, so, thinking Toronto to
Barrie. Yeah,
well,
it could be small.
No, I would disagree with you with Pickering to Mississauga. I would argue that Pickering to Mississauga is just a change in residence and doesn't engage. Okay, actually, I should be careful because if there's equal parenting time and I move that child to Mississauga and then now I have to change schools to Mississauga, or the child now has to commute to school, then that's major, right? But if it's just say every other weekend, then I'll just argue like it's really not that big a deal, like to do this one.
Yeah, if it's not really impacting the other person's parenting time, and there's mechanisms like, will you meet at a midpoint? Will you guys facilitate pickups and drop-offs in a different way to accommodate that change? There's lots of ways to work around it.
That's a huge. I like that I'm happy you said pick up or drop off because that's another one that people often spend so much time arguing over. It's unbelievable. And I understand you're entering into an agreement that would last a very long time. So you want to make sure what you're committing to. But it's also one of those things where there's no right or wrong answer, though. Who does the pickup and drop offs? What do I generally prefer? I prefer the person exercising parenting time to do it. Everything else, being equal, right? But sometimes it's also not reasonable to expect.
Or you can even or you can even share the pickup and drop off, right? Like you can choose to pick up your kids and the other party, the other party can come and pick them up at the end of the parenting time. Again, the more you try to communicate with each other with respect to putting your child's best interest, the easier it's going to be, because otherwise, you can be in the family law system and the justice system for a very long time if you keep nitpicking issues that, you know, you can otherwise really work on.
I agree. And people have
say,
strong
like,
views on some of these things, right? Shireen, sorry to cut you off. The people have very strong views. I personally had a strong view about a client having to drive to Toronto to drop off the kids. And a judge's opinion in that case was, well, your client's not working, so she should be able to drive to downtown Toronto. And I mean, my thoughts were, if she's going to be doing that, she might as well just get a job in Toronto and just drive down to Toronto and this was like midweek. We're talking midweek parenting time and things like that. So yeah, you just have to be creative. But Shireen, you were going to add something earlier.
I was just saying, like, if there is a situation where communication is not something that's viable for the two of you, and I mean because of a situation of domestic violence and just there's truly a contentious issues between the two of you, then, like, you know, pickups and drop-offs at school, meeting at a midpoint. Like, I mean, I never recommend the police station. I think that's kind of traumatic sometimes.
Yeah,
And I think actually I read somewhere recently where a judge just did not enjoy where people do pickups and drop-offs for children at a police station just because of the sheer, I guess, not even uncertainty, but the drama of all of it. Like maybe at a Tim Hortons, at a McDonald's, at something that's more mutual. So, you know, I would always say, like, if you guys don't get along, you don't want to have communication, you want to limit the kind of time that you're seeing each other, pickups and drop-offs directly at school, if that's something that's within your parameter, is a good option.
Yeah, and if you really can manage, if you can manage it like a home, honestly, it just because all of these random locations really just sends the wrong message to the child. But as Shireen said, like, you know, depends on your circumstances, and if it might not be appropriate. So what are your, I mean, so in terms of holiday parenting type, Davina, do you have any preference? How do you structure those?
So again, extended either long weekends or holiday, ideally, depending on your facts again of the case, shared parenting time, right? You can either do even numbers and even numbers numbered years. You can have on an alternating basis, like extended long holidays
So you're not suggesting I take all the long weekends in 2023 and then my partner takes all the long weekends in 2024?
You can if you want, but really, I mean, ideally, it's good to rotate.
Yeah,
It's good to rotate, right? Because that just, I mean, why not? It's nice. But if that works out for the parties where they just want 1 year, they want to celebrate the Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter and everything, well, that's great. But ideally, I've seen it alternating throughout the year between the parties. Yes.
Yeah, and if
any
there's some
comments?
religious holidays, like you guys want to spell that out as well. Sometimes there's religious holidays that are more important for one party, and then maybe more important for the other party to have a different, you know, holiday that they really want to address or religious observation there. So like doing that switch off would make sense. Let's say, you know, you have family traditions that maybe every, you know, Thanksgiving Sunday, you have, you know, a family dinner, and maybe the other party says, okay, Thanksgiving Monday is actually when my family gets together. And, you know, just being mindful. I think the presumption is, for me, is it should be shared unless there's reasons as to why the regular schedule is not fitting. And then I obviously would not start off with shared, but typically, like, a lot of the time people can't get their head around like religious holidays that, you know, we would get time off of, and they would say, well, they know he's not even Christian, he doesn't even celebrate Christmas, why should he have parenting time? That's not a good excuse. Like, it's not going to happen. So if they want the parenting time, unless they agree, of course, like, they're going to get the shared holiday unless there's a circumstance why it's not appropriate.
Shireen, I'm glad that you raised that. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, Shireen, I'm glad that you raised that point where people who don't celebrate Christmas, and then come Christmas time and Christmas parenting time, they're like, hey, no, we're, you know, we're from different faith, and so there should really be no Christmas, no extra holiday parenting time. Courts won't like it. I can tell you right now, courts won't like it.
Some of these holidays have taken a significance beyond the religious aspects of it, right? It's just like time off work and time off school.
Available. It's like a nice time to spend. It's just more time to spend, right?
But I think people should put their mind to some other, like, religious holidays. So I'm thinking there's a lot of Jewish holidays that are not necessarily public holidays.
There's Muslim
There's Eid, for
holidays. Yeah.
example, that's like practiced by Muslims, and it's not often not a holiday. So you want to be
No.
Oh, you want to be mindful of those, and maybe factor it into creating your plan, right? So if you have one person that's Muslim and the other Christian, well, it's okay to agree that, one person gets the Easter weekend, and then if it's Eid, you allow the child go there. I think it's I know, and I think there's value in exposing the children to the different religions, and there's different schools of thoughts here, and I respect that, but while they're still minors, I assume the parents were aware that they don't have the same religions, and they chose to get married and have these children. So, it's kind of late to insist that your way is the right way. The children
Exactly.
should be exposed to both, and they can choose later in life. And knowing kids, they probably will choose none of the above anyway. So okay. And the last thing I wanted to touch on, and this is another big one, so we'll just touch on it at a very high level, is supervised parenting time.
So if I if I may, on supervised parenting time, I mean, one thing I do caution all my clients is that supervised parenting time is never a long-term goal, or at least so far in my experience, I have not seen a final order for supervised parenting time. You crawl, you walk, you run. So if a parent hasn't had parenting time, say in 5 years, 6 years, and now you're back in court and you want parenting time, it's going to start off with supervised and eventually go up. But parents or clients need to understand that eventually it is going to go, if everything goes well, then it may go to unsupervised parenting time. Yeah. It's a very artificial environment for the child. Again, best interest of the child, right? Never in an artificial environment. They need one-on-one with the parent to get more comfortable. Initially, understood, but once they've developed that bond, then you got to move parenting time into the community, and then eventually, unsupervised. So, yeah.
Yeah, very well said.
It may be appropriate for like different reasons why supervised visits are available, not just, I haven't seen this child for X amount of years. It makes sense to get them a little more adjusted. There's also situations of, substance abuse, alcohol abuse, and, just the other party giving off concerning behaviors, or maybe doesn't have the capacity or the ability to parent the child, and that needs to be in a structured environment. Of course, yes, I agree that it should be a temporary measure depending on the circumstances, but sometimes it's appropriate to have supervised visits. It's not appropriate to just say, well, I don't think he can watch him because, I just don't agree. He's a first-time dad, and, it's an infant child. Like, that's not sufficient enough. You're both first-time parents in that regard. I've even had like situations where my client has also had a previous child from a relationship, and they wanted him to have supervised visits, but there was no merit to the visit being supervised. He was an experienced parent. There was never circumstances which warrant that the child is, in need of supervised visits. Of course, there was no risk of harm. There was no issues. So it has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. If you have issues with, and concerns about, the other party, engaging in substance abuse, and, maybe even the environment that they're in, maybe they're in an apartment with like 4 other people that are, not doing the greatest things in there, but like it's maybe a party house. So it makes sense to have those visits maybe curated somewhere else. Even if it's someone you trust by a third party, doesn't necessarily always need to be in a supervised access center, which is sometimes most often recommended.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, I agree with you. And someone had mentioned something earlier that kind of stuck in my head with I think, Tabina, that was you when you were talking about supervised parenting time and kind of graduating up. And that's something that I really want to mention here, because a lot of times when people come to us, they're in different stages of the process. Not only are you in the different stages of your separation process, there's also the children's different stages, right? And Shireen, you were talked about this earlier as well. So what if an appropriate parenting plan for a 2-year-old would not necessarily be the same for a 12-year-old. So those are things that you have to take into consideration. You know, what things might look like right after separation compared to when, say, the family home has been sold and you're both now settled in your separate residences. That's a different stage, right? So sometimes I would have you know, people agree to parenting time, for example, when one party is still living with the parents, maybe they moved out of the home and then now, you know, maybe their grandparents are no longer there and now there's issue being taken and things like that. So obviously, these considerations, we have to think about where you are in the separation process, what stage of development your kids are, and all of these ultimately is to look out for the best interests of your child, right? So I don't know if anybody has anything else to add before we wrap up.
Nothing from my side, Angela. Thank you.
Okay, Shirin, I see you shaking your head, so there's nothing there. So guys, I hope we've given you some things to think about. We wanted to keep this very high level and just guide you to think creatively as you create your own parenting plan, or even or coming to us with your plan. It's, you know, we hope we've given you some food for thought so that we can have, you know, more productive conversations when discussing your parenting plan. We want you to see some of the pitfalls and take these factors into consideration. So just remember, you know, you have to think about what's in your child's best interest. There is no one normal for all families. Just think about what you're doing here. Don't look at your neighbors, your brother, your friend. None of that matters. What matters is your family, the circumstances of your case. You know, think about, when I'm agreeing to this parenting time, can I commit to the picking up and dropping up off? Spell it out if possible so that each party understands what's expected of them. Look at your work schedule before you just agree to plans, because it also is not in the child's best interest if you continue to disappoint because you have work commitments and you're not able to exercise parenting time that you fought so hard for, and now, you know, because of work you can't exercise. Think about your children's activities. Do they actually love them? Are there ways that you can maybe allow some time out of your parenting time just to allow that child the joy of being able to engage in activities that they love? Think about where you're going to be living and make that a factor in doing your parenting plans, because the number of times we've had people kind of fight for parenting schedules, and I know it's happened to all of us, is we insist on this parenting schedule and we finally convinced, you know, the judge, the mediator, arbitrator that this is the best schedule, and then the next thing the person is not even living, the living arrangements change right away, you know. So think about your plans. Think about, you know, if you're going to be relocating, make sure you give those notice requirements. And yeah, factor in holidays, be creative, ultimately be creative and focus on the best interest of your child. And we wish you the best of luck. All right, guys, until next time. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye.